Story 1. Woke up to the sound of children laughing in my backyard at midnight. Looked outside and saw my swing set moving back and forth. But there was not even a breeze that night. Have not been able to look at that swing set the same way since. Story 2. I lived on a historic slave-era plantation in Brazil for many years. I was alone in the house 90% of the time, and my room was across the lawn from the slave quarters. About 5 or 6 times a year, I would hear music, drums, and loud voices coming from the building. I would peer through my screen window but never saw anything. I could not understand the language, nor did I see any light or movement. These events would go on for hours, and I never felt threatened or afraid. I looked forward to these nights, and they never happened when there were guests on the plantation. More cool than creepy. Story 3. I was about 14. The movie The Ring had come out recently, and I had watched it with my parents the week before. I was home alone after school when I heard the television turn on. This was back when you had to turn on the cable box as well, so the screen was just static. If you have seen the movie, you know why I panicked. I went out to the living room, heart pounding, and saw the cat sitting on the television remote. Story 4. When the coronavirus lockdowns hit, my girlfriend and I had just moved into an old farmhouse out in the country. Then she left the state to help her elderly parents prepare for the pandemic. This was my first time living out in the country, and now I was alone in this big old spooky farmhouse, but it was fine because I'm a very brave boy. The first couple of nights were no problem. Then, on the third night, I turned off the television at about midnight and rolled over to go to sleep, but I heard faint music coming from somewhere. I got up and started wandering around the house looking for the source, but I couldn't hear it anymore. I went back to the bedroom, heard it again, and realized it was somehow coming from outside. I figured maybe somebody drove off the road and I was hearing their radio, which gave me a little adrenaline. I threw on some clothes and boots, ran outside, and sure enough, I could hear the music more clearly. I was freaking out, jogging up and down the side of the road along my property, looking for headlights or brake lights, but saw nothing. I knew something was out there, so I started to run up to my shed to get my all-terrain vehicle and expand my search range. When I got in front of the shed and caught my breath, I realized the music was definitely louder, so I was closer to the source, but I knew there was nothing in the shed that could make music. I also realized that the music was this weird, spooky old cowboy music. At that point, I was truly freaked out. Did I mention that I was very stoned for all of this? Yeah, that added to the effect. I poked my head in the shed and confirmed that the music wasn't coming from there, which meant it was coming from the woods behind the shed. The dark, scary, middle-of-the-night forest was somehow creating spooky cowboy music. Okay, if that's how it had to be, I decided I was going to go fight the forest ghost or whatever. So I very slowly approached the back corner of the shed and crept up to the edge to peek around the corner to see a big all-terrain vehicle on a trailer with its console all lit up and the speakers blaring some overnight AM radio broadcast. It quickly dawned on me that I told the man who rents hunting rights on that land that he could park his all-terrain vehicle behind the shed until hunting season started. I called him first thing the next morning to ask if he left the radio on, and he said, "Oh hell, I got distracted and forgot all about it. Did you get that for me?" Like, yeah, I got that for you after running around in the dark for an hour thinking I was in a horror movie. Got that for you. Story 5. My wife took our kids to her mother's house for a week one summer. Music from one of my kids' rooms woke me up in the middle of the night. The song was "The Wheels on the Bus Go Round and Round, Round and Round, Round and Round," and I was confused and freaked out. I grabbed a bat and went to the front of the house. It was one of their toys, a Fisher-Price riding toy shaped like a school bus, blinking and playing music loudly. I have never pulled the batteries out of anything faster. Story 6. 10+ years ago, I was in the kitchen just goofing off and having fun when I heard the doorbell ring. I might have been home alone for whatever reason, but I thought it was something urgent, so I went to the door. When I opened the blinds, I saw nothing. It was a pitch-black night. I wanted to be sure, and that was what started pure chaos. I flicked the outside lights on, and in front of my door, holding a huge knife like in a scary movie, was some man with a clown face on. Normally, I would scream, but in that moment, I had an adrenaline rush I had never felt before. and I screamed at the man, "I'm calling the police!" Surprised, he took off running to a gold beige car and started yelling at his buddies, "Go, go, go!" Enraged, I opened the door, grabbed my keys, and ran to my car. I floored it. I hadn't driven that fast before, trying to catch them. I didn't know if they had a weapon or something, so I just wanted to scare them off for good. I hit the gas. I didn't find them, but 2 police officers circled the block, so I went home. It turned out they had attempted robbery at 1 or 2 neighbors' houses, and the elderly women living there were as scared and angry as I was. I never saw the man again, but trust and believe, I may look innocent, but I don't play. Story 7. When I was about 9, my parents started letting me stay home alone to babysit the kids, aged 5 and 1. Around 8:30 p.m., someone knocked on our glass patio door. A full-grown man was just standing there. I remember yelling, "Dad, some creep is by the door," and then he tried to open it, but it was locked. My siblings and I went into my parents' room and locked the door, then into their ensuite bathroom and locked that door, and finally into their walk-in closet and locked it as well. I didn't know I was allowed to call emergency services. The pounding on the door lasted for a long time. I think he eventually gave up because my dad had installed a 2x4 at the base, so the door couldn't slide even if the lock was undone. Everything was deadbolt. My parents got home around 10 p.m. and yelled at me for keeping everyone awake and didn't believe me. Story 8. Yesterday, I was in my living room folding clothes when I heard a gunshot and glass shattering. My body reacted immediately, and I hit the floor. I didn't hear or see anything else, so after about a minute, I crawled to where I could see our glass sliding doors. Everything was intact with no sign of anything unusual. I was alone, so there was no one else to ask if they heard it. The neighbors heard nothing, and my dog did not get upset. I have no idea what it was or if I experienced some kind of sound hallucination. Story 9. Both mine are animal-related. Once a mountain lion screamed pretty close to my house when I had the windows open. I knew what it was and had even seen the mountain lion that probably made the sound. That is an eerie noise when you're alone in the middle of nowhere. I also slept with my curtains open because privacy was not a big concern out there. The remoteness kind of takes care of that for you. Once I woke up to a big buck peering in my window, silhouetted by moonlight. My dogs were all just looking at it, which was a bit strange, but they were used to seeing deer and were trained not to wake me up unless it was important. Once I startled awake, they started barking and the buck ran off. Story 10. I have 2. My husband worked overnight at the time, and we had 3 cats. One was pretty ill, and we had to decide to euthanize him. It was heartbreaking. The night my husband went back to work on his 7 days on, 7 days off schedule, I had gone to bed and curled up watching TV. I felt one of the cats jump up on the bed and snuggle behind my knees. I looked to see which cat it was, but there was no cat there. Not exactly creepy, more comforting. We now have a dog, an 85-pound Australian Shepherd that will remove an arm if you mess with his human. I am his human. We live on a golf course and have a deck. The golf course gets pretty dark, but most houses have a light on the back. My husband was out, and I had to let the dog out before bed. The dog went out, did his business, and came back up on the deck. As he came up on the deck, I heard the most god-awful screaming. Not human, definitely animal. Freaked me right out. The dog never reacted, not at all. Story 11. I shared a small apartment with another girl, just the 2 of us. Things took a sour turn after a while, so I began making dinner only if she was out or in her room. One day, I was in my room about to make dinner when I heard the entrance door open and close, footsteps, and the balcony door being unlocked and opened. I decided not to leave my room and let her make food or do whatever she was going to do, as she had clearly come home. However, a couple of hours passed, and I heard nothing. I was starving by that point, so I needed to make food anyway. No one came home. She was still out. Her shoes and jacket were gone. I checked the balcony, and the door was closed but somehow unlocked. We always kept it locked. I still have no explanation for that. Story 12. I would not say creepy because I knew the cause, but my father was renewing our rubber door seal because it was getting old. Sometimes in the middle of the night, the door would just randomly open, and it sometimes made a pretty loud sound. Story 13:02 and 30 seconds AM. Husband is away for work. Just me and the kids. The doorbell rings. I think I'm dreaming because I'm half asleep. Maybe I imagined it? Waiting. The doorbell rings again. Definitely real. The bedroom is right next to the front entrance. I wait inside the bedroom with nothing to defend us. I can't peek my head around the corner to see who is there because it's a glass front door and they would see me. Longest night of my life. Faulty doorbell. Story 14. A few years ago, I was sitting in my bed at midday with the bedroom door slightly closed. Clear as crystal, I heard a woman sneezing right outside my bedroom. I got up, but no one was there. The only other person at home was my brother on the other side of the house. I asked him if he had just sneezed. He said no. The only other woman in my house would have been my mother, who passed away over 10 years ago. Story 15. I walked past a window where I thought the shadow outside looked a little odd, like too big and too dark. I backtracked and stared at it, thinking I was imagining things. But when I started to walk away again, it ducked down, which made me flinch and go grab a flashlight. When I returned, it was gone. Story 16. My house is on the side of a highway, and I have windows facing it. One night, I couldn't sleep, so I decided to tire myself out by jump roping. Halfway through my session, I glanced outside and saw a man standing on the closest side of the highway under a lamppost, staring at me. Felt like something out of a horror movie. When I saw his creepy silhouette, I immediately ducked to the ground. When I looked up, he was gone. Now, it seems funny, he was probably just a homeless man confused about why someone was jump roping at midnight. When I fell, he probably ran off. Story 17. I lived alone in an apartment building near a downtown area with many bars and clubs. One night around 4:30 a.m., I was in bed in my small studio apartment when I heard footsteps crunching on the pebbles outside my window. This was not unusual because many shift workers lived there, and my unit was next to the laundry room, so people often came and went at odd hours. However, instead of the footsteps moving toward the laundry room, they went around the corner of the building. The next thing I knew, the handle on my back door was rattling back and forth, and someone was trying to pull it open. I was terrified and could barely keep my hands steady while I called emergency services from my cell phone. The noise stopped before the police arrived, which felt like it took an hour. An officer took down the little information I had and said they couldn't find anyone on the property but were checking the neighborhood. On Monday afternoon, as I was coming home from work, I ran into a neighbor at the mailboxes and mentioned what had happened the previous morning. It had happened at her place as well, except she saw the person before calling emergency services. She was a bartender, and the man going around our building trying doors was a drunk customer who had followed her home after the bar closed. The police found him a block away from the building, and when they arrested him, he had a knife on him. Story 18. I got home from a night shift at 7 a.m. and was about to hop in the shower when I heard someone pounding on the front door. My bathroom overlooks the front of the house, so I peeked out of the window. There was a woman, maybe in her 30s, banging on my door, sobbing and wailing, "Please help me. Oh God, please help me," over and over again. I was going to call down from the window to ask what she needed when she suddenly stopped and calmly walked away. Freaked me out. Story 19. I basically live in the woods, and it gets pitch black at night during the colder months. One time, I came downstairs and saw a giant shadowy figure at the back door. I thought it was a serial killer or robber trying to get in. I turned on the kitchen light to get a better view. It was a bear. Story 20. I wasn't home alone, but I was the only one awake. I heard the rattle on my son's activity center in the living room. It's plastic with beads inside, and you have to roll it for it to make a sound. I told my partner about it the next day. About a week later, I heard it again in the middle of the night, and he was awake to hear it too. The first time, I played it off like maybe it was our dog getting into mischief, but the second time he was in bed with us. Still no explanation. Story 21. Oh yeah, I have one that will give you goosebumps. I had this little walkie-talkie set I used to play with. It had a pretty decent range, about 500 meters or so. I was home on a Saturday afternoon while my parents were out with my brother for his football game. My sister was at a friend's for a sleepover birthday party. Out of the blue, my receiver went off loudly, and I heard a random voice yelling, "Watch out!" I fell off my chair and ran to the neighbor's house. They came back with me to check the house because I was spooked. They checked the place, and as we were going through it, we heard the shed door outside slam shut. The police were called. They searched around and found nothing. To this day, I get a shiver down my spine thinking about it. We lived out in the bush at the time, and unless you were one of about 8 people besides my immediate family, you had to drive pretty far to get to our road. Nothing ever came of it, but I slept in my brother's room for about a month afterward. Story 22. My parents were out for the night, coming home late, and I went to bed instead of waiting for them. I woke up needing the toilet, and when I was in the bathroom, I heard my mum calling me from downstairs. I went down to see what she wanted, but everything was dark and silent, and there was no one there. My parents had not gotten home yet. Story 23. A scorpion. Luckily, my aunt lived next door and came over to smack it with a sandal. Truly, the sandal has no equal. Story 24. Heard a closet door open and shut from the other room. Freaked out, grabbed a knife, and went through the closet, but no one was there. My guess is it was half open and the air conditioner turned on. Story 25. I heard a noise on my porch, so loud it woke me up at around 1 a.m. Then my pit bull started going absolutely insane. I think it was just a feral cat, though. I am pretty sure one lives under the deck. That is what I told myself to go back to sleep. Story 26. When I was 15, I was left home alone for a weekend, so I took time to reorganize the storage items in my closet, including a bunch of old toys. Fast forward to 3 a.m. when some army toy randomly went off with a loud fire in the hole and a sound effect of a grenade exploding. I thought for a few seconds that the United States Navy sea, air, and land teams were breaching my house. Story 27. I heard a door opening in the middle of the night, but my doors were locked, so I just ignored it. I assumed it was some kind of explainable gravity effect or something with an internal door. The next morning, I walked to the kitchen and my front door was open, which meant it had been open all night, despite the handle and locking mechanism still being in the locked position. Unrelated, but I also have neighbors with schizophrenia who have verbally abusive delusions about me. They live in a historic village known for stories of ghost sightings. Story 28. Something banged on my parents' metal screen door. I grew up in Skinwalker country. At the time, the house I lived in was a mile from the nearest neighbor and 7 miles from the nearest town. Story 29. I buy items from a local secondhand shop all the time. I bought a small Winnie the Pooh alarm clock a while ago. Ticked for a good 2 months before the battery ran out. I was too lazy to replace it because I didn't use it anyway. I just bought it because it was $1 and cute. The other night, after about 6 months, it started ticking again. Story 30. I was staying in a cabin by the lake during heavy rain and flooding. The lake was rising and was about 20 feet from the back door. The house was on a slight incline, and water and mud were building up on one side, beginning to spill over the foundation into the house. Water and earthworms started coming into the kitchen. Then, a giant centipede crawled in and came straight toward me. I had a broom that I was using for the worms and hit it as hard as I could, which only made it angrier. The centipede tried to come at me. After a few more hits, it finally backed off and crawled under a kitchen cabinet. I put on some boots, went outside, and shoveled the mud away from the side of the house, making a small trench to channel the water away. Then I went inside and shoveled and swept all the earthworms out, but never saw the centipede again. Story 31. I saw my cat Jingsy, who died years ago, jump onto my lap after I had a bad dream. It was a little creepy. Story 32. In the house alone, I woke up hearing what sounded like a child laughing in my room. Then I heard, "Sleepy time, close your eyes. Sleep time, night night," coming from the wardrobe. Naturally, I was freaking out, thinking I was about to be chopped into a million little pieces by a child-sounding serial killer called the Sleeper, who was somehow in my wardrobe. It was a Furby. Story 33. My mom passed away. Each time I went to play games or talk to friends on the phone, I would hear her call for me. I was never alone when she was here on Earth with me, but since her passing, I've been with my father, who is hardly home. This time, she called out for me, asking if I wanted to eat dinner and go to the store to get something sweet. Mind you, everything in the house was turned off because it was night. My dogs were barking as if she was physically here. I went to check if someone was here or if something mimicked her voice. Nothing, just darkness with small night lights on. Look, I love that woman so much, but whatever she was doing creeped me out badly. Story 34. I fell asleep on the couch when I was about 16 or 17. When I woke up, I had a weird feeling I was being watched. I got up and looked out our patio door. There were footprints in the fresh snow that led from the back gate to the patio doors where it looked like someone had stood. They could clearly see me sleeping on the couch. Not only is that creepy, but the footprints never led away. It still creeps me out thinking about it. Story 35. My older brother was in a different city, and everyone else was in the village. We have a cat, but she is not very big. I stayed at home because of allergic bronchitis, and it was spring, so if I went to the village, I would have had a severe pollen allergy reaction. My room was directly in front of the corridor, and I have a bad habit of grabbing blankets and sleeping on the floor. It is just comfortable. I was facing the door, lying on the ground, researching the history of democracy. I had been awake for over 68 hours and was on medication, although I do not remember what. I only remember taking a pill in the morning. Democracy is an interesting topic. Suddenly, someone walked into the room. I only remember looking up at their figure and then passing out. When I woke up, I was terrified and immediately called my aunt. Sleep deprivation is not something to take lightly. Can cause hallucinations. Story 36. Once I saw a dog and a man walk by. Out the window, I got a text from my dad asking me to check the post. I opened the door and saw a shadow of the man walking his dog coming up the driveway. He didn't say hold up or wait, so since I wasn't expecting anybody, I closed the door and ran to the kitchen. I stared at the door, and standing there was a black shadow figure, just standing still, blocking my view of the trees. Usually, you can see the color of clothes through the frosted glass, but this time, nothing. He didn't knock or say anything. I turned away for 1 second, looked back, and he was gone. I went into the living room to catch the man and dog leaving, but they were gone. I don't know what happened. Story 37. Not me, but my daughter. She was home alone during high school. We had a kitchen cabinet below the counter that would not stay shut. So my husband took a spatula and put it through the handles of that cabinet and the one next to it to keep the dogs out. One night, my daughter was home alone with the dogs on the couch when she heard a noise in the kitchen. The spatula was lying on the floor, and the cabinet was open. Another time, my husband woke up one morning to find the locked door to our crawl space standing wide open. Story 38. I came home one night after work. It was fall and winter, so it was pitch black even though it was about 8 p.m. My front door was open. My grandfather lived next door at the time, and he would come over to put the cat in or turn on lights for us if Mom or I were out after dark. I figured he just hadn't shut the door. I walked in, heard something in the kitchen, looked over, and saw a bit of moonlight reflecting off someone's glasses. I turned on the living room light instead of leaving quickly. It was my grandfather. He had come over just a minute before I got home. Bless his heart, he decided to turn on the kitchen stove light for us instead of starting with the living room light. When he heard me, he was about to say something but startled me instead of doing the usual, "Hey, I'm here." He has been gone 25 years and was a great man. That is the first thing I always think of when I think about him. Story 39. I have a sleep pattern where I wake up in the middle of the night for about an hour. When I was young, I slept on the couch one summer because it was cooler in that room. One night, while I was awake, I heard a plastic cup fall over in the kitchen. I thought someone must be awake and getting a drink, and I expected to see them walking down the hallway in a few seconds, going back to the bedroom. No one ever did. The next morning, I woke up early and went to the kitchen to see what had fallen. Nothing. There was nothing anywhere that had fallen. This is a simple story, but I never figured out how I heard something fall on the kitchen counter. But no one and nothing was there. Story 40. My family lived in a pretty big house growing up, and I was home alone one night and heard apparent knocking sounds on a large window we had. I will never forget that night. I still wonder who that was. Maybe my neighbor, who was also a kid, was playing a prank. Story 41. One time, I saw an old man at my front door trying to get into the house. He tried to turn the handle a couple of times and then stood at the door for about 15 to 20 seconds before eventually just leaving. All of that happened while I was in the bathroom, and I only knew about it because it was caught on the doorbell camera. Story 42. I was in high school and my parents were out. I was scrolling on my phone and came across a disturbing article about a United Parcel Service delivery driver dropping off bombs to homes. I think it was a bogus source, but I didn't know it at the time. As soon as I finished reading it, my doorbell rang. I looked out the window in my room and saw a United Parcel Service truck at the end of the driveway with a package at the front. It was obviously irrational, but the timing was just insane. As an anxious kid, it freaked me out, especially because United Parcel Service deliveries were very rare to my home. We weren't that central, and I had no awareness of any expected deliveries. Story 43. I was about 14 or 15 years old, babysitting for a family for the first time. The lounge was a strange round room with windows all the way around, and it was pitch black outside with no nearby neighbors. I was watching television, smoking cigarette butts in their ashtray. I know, bad habit. Suddenly, a devilish cackling laugh, very loud, possibly coming from right behind me. But the couch I was sitting on was against the wall. I was absolutely frozen with fear, just staring at the dark windows. I must have sat there scared for 5 minutes, my mind racing. What was that? Did I imagine it? Eventually, an elderly Jack Russell dog hobbled out from behind the sofa, made a similar cackle, then wandered off. They had not told me they had a dog. Story 44. The man downstairs told the woman that he was going to put her in a box and bury her alive, like in the movie. Story 45. Once, while I was home alone during a power outage, I heard someone whisper my name from the kitchen. I thought it was my mind playing tricks until the motion sensor light in the hallway turned on by itself. Story 46. We live in the suburbs. My husband was out of town shortly after we moved in. It was winter and very cold. I slept badly the first few days he was gone. I was playing World of Warcraft in the office at around 3 a.m. I heard footsteps on the large semi-wraparound porch. I was trying to decide if it was the wind, a dog, or something else. Then there was a bang on the office window and rattling. I looked out and saw a woman trying to open my office window. I yelled at her and grabbed my phone to call the police. She kept trying to get in. I yelled again. She demanded that I open the door and give her a blanket and some money for food. I said no and told her I had called the police. She argued for a bit and then wandered down the street as the police arrived. Felt like a very long 10 minutes. The police ultimately took her to a shelter a few towns over. She never came back. The house had been empty for about 5 years before we bought it. Story 47. Soon after my dad passed away, when I was 12, I was sitting on the floor of my room cleaning something. My back was to the door, which was cracked open about 1 or 2 feet. I felt a weird, unsettling energy, and as I turned to look behind me, my door slammed shut. Ignoring the fact that I could literally see the other side of the door at that moment and there was absolutely nothing there, I started reasoning with myself. First, all the windows were closed, and we did not have a drafty house. Plus, if it were wind, it would have had to have been a really strong gust that I would have felt as I was right in front of the door. Second, it could not have been my dog, as my door needed to be pushed closed from my side. When I went to check on her, she was peacefully asleep in the living room. Third, nothing fell or bumped into the door. And fourth, literally no one else was home. I was insanely freaked out, crying, and scared. It seemed to be the catalyst for other creepy experiences. From that night on, whenever I tried to fall asleep, I felt someone standing next to my bed, like all night. Covers over my head were not enough, so I eventually moved into the living room and slept there for the next 3 years. Every now and then, it would feel like someone was touching my blanket or trying to tug it off me. I would walk into one room, come back, and the lights would be on or off, the opposite of however I left them. And the footsteps drove me crazy. Due to bad circumstances, I was living by myself the entire time, but knowing I was home alone and still hearing people walk around was unnerving. I have never heard something so crisp and defined that was not actually produced by a physical person. They would often go back and forth for an hour on the third floor, which had been vacant my entire life, then stop only to start again later. I would hear them going down or coming up the stairs, walking around the kitchen, and so on. Eventually, I moved out, but my family still owns the house. Every now and then, I still get hit with a sense of dread or something creepy. Mostly now, I and other people experience my grandma's dead dog, who is probably waiting for her to join her. I am not sure if it was my dad that I was experiencing as a teen, while the timing did line up. If it was him, I am upset because I was so terrified. Story 48. I told the story before about teenage boys getting into my house while I was alone and in the shower. However, that was not the creepiest thing I have seen while alone. I was 19, living away from my parents for the first time. Living on the outskirts of the city was cheaper than the main city, so I had moved somewhere close to farmland. I did not feel like going to a party with my roommates, so I stayed behind. I would not say I was perfectly alone. One of my roommates decided to ditch his daughter and go to the party instead of spending time with her as he was supposed to. I was in the kitchen making dinner for a napping 4-year-old and myself. The sun had already set because I was just coming home from work past 7. I heard knocking at the back door. I thought it must be Liliana being goofy, but she could not undo the top latch, so I did not have to worry about her getting out. I continued cooking for the two of us, and just as I was about to reach for the fridge next to the stove, I heard a knocking on the kitchen window. Liliana could not possibly reach the window unless she stood on the kitchen sink, so I brushed it off as a branch or a misheard noise. I would have definitely heard her climbing on the sink otherwise. However, I turned and spotted a severed cow head in the window. I screamed bloody murder and dropped the egg I was holding, backing away in a panic. I reached for my phone to call emergency services and finally saw a text message from one of my roommates. Ordered cow head from Jorge. He will be around by 8:20 to drop it off. Put in freezer for me, please, thanks. By the way, Lily cannot have her chocolate until after dinner, Marty said. Jorge was an absolute sweetheart of a farmhand. I opened the back door for him, which was our regular delivery door for butcher cuts from his family farm. He put the cow head away while I cleaned up and comforted Liliana, whom I definitely woke up with my screaming. I let her have chocolate before dinner as an apology. I sometimes still shudder when I hear knocking on glass. Story 49. I was listening to War Pigs by Black Sabbath and the record started to skip. Satan laughing. Satan laughing. At first I was like, yeah, and threw up the horns but got spooked by it very quickly. Story 50. I'll be honest, our neighbor, who has now passed away, used to do some truly strange and scary things. Story 51. Not my house, but a good friend's house that I house sat and dog sat for while they went on vacation for a few days. They had a fancy electronic lock on the front door that you could unlock using a code if you didn't have a key. The inside had a standard deadbolt lock and a lock on the door handle. They had installed a ring camera that was set to notify them if there was movement at the front. It covered the majority of the front door, porch, driveway, and walkway leading up to it. They also had motion detectors on the windows and doors of the first story as safety precautions, even though they lived in a cul-de-sac. I was sitting in the living room, out of sight from the front door, with both her dogs. Suddenly, one of the dogs, the male, quickly propped up, started loudly barking, and ran to the front door. I immediately got up to check what was going on, and upon entering where I could see the front door, I saw that it was wide open. The dog had stopped running and just stared off into the open at the edge of the porch. The sound detector did not go off. Nothing was caught on the camera aside from the moment the dog got outside onto the porch and when I stepped out to look around and grab the dog. According to them, after I called, no person was in sight. I checked to see if the motion chime was disabled or dead. It worked perfectly. The locks also worked perfectly, and I always locked the deadbolt and handle lock. They neglected to tell me this had happened to them once before, and they had always felt a weird energy within their house. I am not really friends with them anymore, but they moved out of the house, and the event is still unexplained to this day. Story 52. I was in an old abandoned house doing pest control. I had to go down into the super creepy hand-dug basement to look for rats. There was a note on the hatch that said, "Help me." There was nothing down there. I assumed it was a joke from another contractor, but I was on edge. Story 53. The other night, I kept hearing a rack sound outside, like someone was dragging a stick down a corrugated washboard. I went outside and looked around. Across the street was an empty house, and one of the high-set windows was open. I shone a flashlight inside and saw one of our chronically homeless drug users with foam coming from the corner of his mouth. The sound was his feet slipping on the vinyl siding as he struggled to climb up and into the window. Story 54. I was about 19 and had just moved into my own place for the first time. It was late at night, and I was just relaxing, smoking, and listening to music on a compact disc. The album I was listening to had finished. A few minutes later, there was a loud scream followed by a disjointed voice saying, "There is someone in the house." It turned out the album had a hidden Easter egg track at the end, but I had not realized that at the time. It really scared me. Story 55. I owned a black Labrador that was territorial and a bit aggressive, but nothing too extreme. He was also very stuck in his dog ways, like he was a little old man. Every new guest got barked at during the first 2 or 3 visits before he decided they were okay. He spent almost no time on our second floor. He made an exception to the above 2 rules for one person, my sister's now ex-boyfriend. He never stopped barking at him and would spend a lot of time on the second floor. It bothered me greatly, and I insisted that there was something wrong with this man and that he needed to leave. My family thought I was crazy and accused me of finding any reason to dislike him and training the dog to dislike him. One night, I saw the dog sitting an inch from my sister's door, unwilling to take commands or food. I waited until 3 a.m. before hearing him stand up. I ran up the hallway and opened my sister's door to discover her boyfriend strangling her. Had I not been alerted by the severe change in behavior from an aggressive dog, she would be dead. Story 56. This happened about 35 years ago when I was 10 or 11. This was right around the time my parents decided they could leave me home alone for a few hours. I think it was awards banquet night for my brother's high school senior class, so I was home alone until probably 10 at night. It was very windy outside, and our house had big pine trees around it. When the wind blew, the trees made an immense sound of branches shaking and rubbing against each other. I still held on to superstitions about various rooms in the house, like that if I didn't run past the living room when it was dark, something would jump out and get me. So I had the whole house lit up like a Christmas tree. Wind blowing, trees shaking. I'm alone. I decided to turn on the television and watch something. Distractions are good, right? Since it was getting later in the evening, Nickelodeon, the children's television channel, had switched over to Nick at Night, so it was showing black and white classic television shows instead of cartoons. At this time, it was an episode of the 1950s Superman television series. I had cocooned myself in a blanket, trying to ignore the sounds outside, watching this old Superman show with every light on in the house, when a number of things happened all at once. 1. Superman busted through a brick wall and discovered a skeleton chained to a wall, like you might see in a dungeon. A woman with him screamed at the sight. A very strong gust of wind blew, making the trees outside go wild. I heard something blow over. The lights flickered. Every single room in the house that I had intentionally turned on so there would be no dark spots went out for half a second. I was freaked out. The television wasn't like modern ones that you have to turn back on when they lose power. It had a physical power switch, so when the power came back on, the television did as well. There was the skeleton on the television again. My parents came home to find me in a fully lit house, the television showing Donna Reed show reruns, and me hiding in my bed under every blanket I could find, yelling at them, "Why did you take so long to get home?" Story 57. I was around 14 and home alone in the apartment. Suddenly, from downstairs, I heard what sounded like the kitchen's sliding door or a cabinet door slamming. I called for my mom, but there was no answer. I called a friend, and suddenly there was more intense banging from downstairs. They heard it and told me to call emergency services. Instead, they called my mom, who rushed home. When she arrived, all of our cabinet doors were open, and our sliding glass door was slightly open as well. I never slept the same there again. We moved shortly after. Story 58. Gunfire. Not even 50 feet outside my front door. Suburban neighborhood. Drug and gang members rented a home across the street. Drive-by shooting. Story 59. I might have been experiencing sleep paralysis, but a few years ago in my old house, I was taking a nap in the afternoon and I could swear someone was in the room with me. I was on the couch and felt a presence on the ottoman behind me to the point where I closed my eyes and thought that if I pretended to be asleep, they would leave. I then swore I heard someone go into the bathroom a few rooms over and pee in the toilet. Again, probably sleep paralysis, but when I snapped out of the state I was in, I left the house and waited until I was fully away before calling my parents and describing what happened. There were no signs of an intruder. The dog would have barked and she was fine, and nothing was out of place, but we did joke about the peeing ghost for a bit. Story 60. The kitchen window opening awakened me. I yelled in the strongest voice a woman can make, and they fled. Story 61. I have a small trapdoor in my bedroom ceiling that makes a specific sound when moved. One time, I heard it being opened, and another day, my sister and I heard loud footsteps coming from the ceiling. I know something is in there, but it was probably a small animal. Story 62. I thought I saw my deceased grandmother once in the living room at 3 a.m. It was dark and I was very hungover, but I swear she was about 8 feet tall for sure. I still do not know if this was a dream or a real occurrence. Story 63. Not me, but my 3 teenage sisters were home alone watching a scary movie in the dark. From the next room, they heard the boom of the low keys on the piano, then someone playing the rest of the keys. It was the cat. Story 64. I don't hallucinate and I'm not crazy, at least not that much. We just bought a house, and I swear a cat must have died in it because I constantly see one running in the corner of my eye. Story 65. The sound of a hammer banging on the side of my house. I was home alone with my 2 sisters, and only my little sister and I heard it. We turned off all the lights in the house and tried calling our parents, but they were at a pharmacy and did not pick up until about 7 tries. Story 66. One Halloween, when I was 14 or 15, I was left alone at home for an extended period. Our computer room was on the lower level of the house. The computer faced a window with the user having their back to the window. The shade was down. I was doing typical mid-2000s teenage activities when I heard 3 taps on the window that sounded too organized to be an animal or a branch. We lived in a rural area. I did not dare to open the shade, so I still wonder. Story 67. 2 stories. Not the scariest you've ever heard, but they scared me. Once I was home alone as a kid, maybe sick or something, not sure. My parents were at work. I think my mom had planned to come home on her lunch break to check on me. It was storming outside, and being a smart kid, I decided to watch a show on the History Channel about ghost ships or haunted shipwrecks. I was sufficiently scared, and at an extremely convenient and scary moment in the show, a big thunderclap and lightning strike happened outside, and the power went out. I nearly lost control of myself. Another time, I was in college in my apartment. My roommate had left for the weekend. I was taking a shower, and without any explanation, right in the middle of my shower, the lights in the bathroom went out. The bathroom door was shut, and there were no windows, so it became pitch dark while I was washing my hair. As someone who never forgot the shower scene from The Grudge, I again nearly lost control of myself. Story 68. 4 years ago, at another house I was living in at the time, I heard my late grandmother calling my name in my sleep. It was like a scene from a movie. Imagine it like you see it in cinema with all special effects. A quick moment of her touching or grabbing me and saying I have cancer. I instantly freaked out, jumped out of bed, gasping for air, and sweating. Around 2023, I was diagnosed with lymphoma, which apparently had developed around 2021, the same year as the dream. Now you tell me I try not to believe in metaphysical and supernatural things, but what was that? Story 69. Scotland the Brave started playing through my apartment. I thought I had turned off my computer after watching YouTube. Story 70. I was home playing video games. While I was playing, I heard my roommate's voice. When I called out to him, he didn't respond. When I went to see why he was calling me, he was sleeping the entire time. Freaked me out. Story 71. Creaking in the attic storage space sounded like someone crawling near the access point to the living areas. Story 72. 1-inch hail on the roof when I was a kid. I thought United States Naval Special Warfare Development Group was coming through the wrong roof. Story 73. I just moved into a new house with all hardwood floors. It is a Victorian-style home with many small rooms and nooks. On the first night, while going to bed, I heard the sound of a wire coat hanger falling and hitting the ground. Ping, 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 ping. Totally freaked me out. Story 74. I had a hypnagogic hallucination 3 years ago of the monster in Barbarian standing in the doorway to the bathroom. It was terrifying. Story 75. I heard a thud from the stairs. I don't know why I was so scared, probably because I was always really paranoid about someone breaking in. I went to the hallway to see what it was. I think I had my hand in a fist or something. It was a box. My cat had thrown a box down the stairs. I put the box back and petted her. Stupid cute cat. Story 76. I was home alone and put the dogs in their kennels for the night, then closed the gate. I went back upstairs to lie down and watch a movie. Suddenly, I heard someone running up and down the stairs outside my bedroom door. I checked my husband's location, and he was still out at the movies. It was very strange. I went out and checked the house, and it was empty. The gate to the mudroom was still closed, and the dogs were sleeping in their kennels. Story 77. A single gunshot sounded right outside my kitchen window, where I was standing. I live in a relatively safe neighborhood, and I ducked instinctively. There were no sounds afterward, neighbors did not come out, and no sirens followed. Nothing. Story 78. I lived alone with my cat Angel. A couple of nights in a row, I heard my cupboard slowly roll open. I thought it was her wanting to explore, so I thought nothing of it. One night, I heard the cupboard roll open again. I turned to face the other way when my hand landed on my cat's fur. I ignored it and went back to sleep, as I was still a bit hazy. I only realized what had happened the next morning. I didn't sleep in that room after that. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.